Today, we're making Creole Jambalaya, a tomato-tinted, smoky, savoury one-pot rice dish that blends cultures and flavours. We start with the sausages. Low heat, traditionally lard, bacon drippings or neutral oil, but you have the option to let them go in dry for the around 20% fat of our andouille to soften. Then, the signature smoky fat starts to flow into our pot, browning the sausages, developing complex flavours, concentrating the garlic heat, the cayenne warmth, taking on the deep colour from the paprika. If you don't have access to andouille, the overriding objective here is smokiness. So use any smoked sausage and adjust the fat accordingly. Once you can see bronze around the edges, andouille comes out. With the spices out of the way, we crank up the heat further. Chicken goes in. First, to rapidly evaporate its surface moisture. Then, once we get past boiling point, we once again develop complex, meaty flavours via the Maillard reaction, and later roasted nutty notes thanks to caramelization. Because of the low heat start, they might stick a bit. Even better, we get concentrated forms of the two things we just mentioned to be mopped up later by our aromatics. And because of the fat and the surface moisture we talked about, the order of these two going in makes a massive difference. We're using chicken thighs as they can take on higher heat and longer cooking. Boneless because of the cooking time. Skinless for better fat control. If you want to use chicken breast, cook them whole and cut them up later. Very good. Once they're lightly golden, they come out. You want to preserve the fond and not burn it. And to mop up this beauty, we introduce the Holy Trinity. Onion to form our savoury base and provide some subtle sweetness. Celery for some herbal note. And green bell pepper, which after long cooking will give us some earthy sweetness. We salt, bearing in mind the andouille is salty. Unlike the Cajun version, we're not browning this hard. We simply want it to first release some moisture to help us lift our fond. Then we evaporate that moisture to concentrate the flavours we just mentioned. Once there's not much steam coming out and you pretty much have a clean bottom, garlic goes in to impart even more umami. Goes in later so the sugar content does not burn. Once the garlic's fragrant and you can almost see a thin layer of fat, cayenne goes in for some sharp heat and bright red colour. Deviation from the classics, bay leaf goes in slightly earlier to activate its fat-soluble flavours, the eucalyptus, minty notes, and later some gentle bitterness following the same logic. Dry thyme goes into bloom for the earthy, resinous aroma. If you're using fresh thyme, add it later, as it can be quite heat sensitive. We're keeping the seasoning simple, but you can use whatever you like. On that note, black pepper for some earthy heat, and the only seasoning besides salt in 1885. Now the Creole saffron, historically fresh tomatoes, out of season, we use tinned, which became popular in the 50s. You can add as much or as little as you like. For me, this remains a meat and rice dish. The tomato is there to provide a bit of acidity, a bit of umami, some subtle sweetness, but most importantly, the colour, which is largely fat-soluble, so we give it some face time with our yummy fat. Another reason to cook down the tomato is the rice. Just like a plof or paella, you want our smoky fat to coat each grain of rice to modulate starch release, to prevent clumping. Now, once you can see a thin layer of this orange oil, rice goes in to coat. And this is the only time you're allowed to mix. We're not making a risotto. One even layer, chicken stock. If you're using store-bought, use low sodium, as the andouille will release more salt. Given our ingredients will still release moisture, a safe starting point is 1.8 to 1 stock to rice ratio. Now our first lid Chicken and sausages, they go on top so the rice cooks evenly. And as the simmering later turns into steaming, meat juices drips down. Once this is starting to bubble, our second lid on, low heat, 20 minutes, followed by a 10-minute rest. Look at that. We tilt to inspect. It's okay to see oil, not soup. But every day we have different ingredients. There's no magic formula. Today we got lucky. If you see a bit of soup, just simmer without the lid. We fluff to release trapped steam. Scallion, hot sauce, that's jambalaya.